Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Woodman, and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to talk about the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan. This is important because it was a major instance where the United States coordinated with another country to limit immigration from them. In this case, it was Japan, called the Gentleman's Agreement. Let's go over how this came about and what happened after this was created. On October 11, 1906, in the offices of the San Fracisco School Board, Aaron Altman said, quote, "To prevent our white elementary school children from being contaminated, we will require all Japanese to attend the Chinese school. There is an overcrowding in the schools. The earthquake damaged many schools, and the Japanese children might overwhelm the white children in the schools that are open," unquote. However, the press said, quote, "But didn't the president of the Board of Education announce that there was very little overcrowding when the schools were open on July 23rd? There are 25,000 children in the elementary schools now. How many are Japanese?" Unquote. Altman was not certain, and the press said 93 Japanese students. Altman said he would check, but he did not have to check. He knew 93 was correct. To add more context, Altman had been an art student in Paris before returning to San Francisco. He had no experience in education. He was, however, Abe Rueff's son-in-law, but Rueff's ploy would have important supporters. William Randolph Hearst, publisher of the San Francisco Examiner, said, quote, "Let's play this up, boys. Japanese people are polluting white schools. Soon they'll take over. We've got to warn people," unquote. Hearst, along with V.S. McClatchy of the Sacramento Bee, had been demonizing Japanese people for years. One of his favorite ploys was to publish stories about the Japanese invasion. In 1905, the Examiner ran a cartoon showing a Japanese soldier casting a shadow across the Pacific and over California. Hearst reasoned this by saying, quote, "It sells newspapers. Where do you think yellow journalism came from? Sensational stories with little or no relation to the facts. That's me. Didn't I tell you? Sells newspapers. And I started a tradition," unquote. Hearst had plans to help Rueff and Schmitz deflect public opinion from their investigation. Hearst said, quote, "Here's a headline we'll run. Guaranteed to get the citizenry up in arms. Japan sounds our coast. Spies of the Emperor plat Monterey Bay. Brown men have maps and could land easily. All's fair in politics after all," unquote. Rueff and Schmitz hoped with Hearst and McClatchy behind them. They figured the story would be page one and push the investigation on Rueff and Schmitz to the back, but that did not work well. The investigation stayed on page one, and the school thing was pushed to the back. Francis J. Henley even impaneled a grand jury, but Rueff's move against Japanese children was page one somewhere else. At the HQ of the Japanese Navy, Tokyo, they said, quote, "Stand up, Japanese nation. Our countrymen have been humiliated on the other side of the Pacific. Our poor boys and girls have been expelled from public schools by the rascals of the United States, cruel and merciless like demons. At this time, we should be ready to give a blow to the United States. Yes, we should be ready to strike the devil's head with an iron hammer for the sake of the world's civilization. Why do we not insist on sending ships? We cannot allow the United States or anyone else to treat us as a nation of inferiors. We must show them the folly of that thinking as we show the Russians. America is stronger than Russia. Anyone is, and we do not have to traverse the Pacific Ocean to defeat the Tsar. Perhaps we could send ships to attack Hawaii. Perhaps, if the time comes. For now, I suggest we wait. We met President Roosevelt during the peace negotiations, and no, he is no fool. I cannot believe he will allow this move by corrupt city officials to stand unopposed," unquote. The admiral was correct. At this point, Roosevelt told Secretary of State Elihu Root to get in touch with Rueff, since Roosevelt was not told in advance what he was planning. Roosevelt said, quote, "Tell them I intend to sue the Board of Education, and I am willing to send in troops to San Francisco to kick them out of office. I want to cable our ambassador in Tokyo and tell him to give assurances to Japan that we are taking action on this. Damn fools will start a war, unquote. Root's holding action was successful, but the problem still had to be solved. Unfortunately for Roosevelt, he had no real authority to change the school board order. President Roosevelt had done everything he could to soothe the feelings of the Japanese. He had even addressed Congress and said, quote, "The overwhelming mass of our people cherish a lively regard and respect for the people of Japan. To shut them out from the public schools is a wicked absurdity when there are no first-class colleges in the land, including the universities and colleges of California, which do not gladly welcome Japanese students and on which Japanese students do not reflect credit," unquote. Roosevelt wanted to avoid plunging the United States into a war with Japan over 93 children. He told Rueff, quote, "We are sensitive to your issues with Japanese immigration. I think you and your supporters need to be sensitive to the implications of making such a fuss over a few Japanese children," unquote. A proposal would be developed to end this crisis. If Japan agreed to a treaty that would restrict the immigration of unskilled labor into the United States would allow the Japanese children to remain in white schools. As it happened, the American ambassador in Tokyo had communicated to Washington that the Japanese government had proposed the same solution. For all the talk, they didn't want a war either. However, there was no way a treaty would get ratified by the Senate. So, an agreement was made between the gentlemen in Japan. Nothing in the Constitution prevents this from happening. However, the founders did not want a U.S. president to make agreements with foreign powers on their own. Still, Roosevelt believed the Constitution could be manipulated and has been since the beginning. It's pretty much what politicians in Washington say it is. Roosevelt was right. The Gentleman's Agreement, as it was called, went into effect in 1908. Japan stopped issuing passports to ordinary laborers bound for the United States, which made the labor movement in the West happy, and the Japanese children were readmitted to white schools in San Francisco. President Roosevelt also issued an executive order excluding Japanese immigrants trying to enter the United States via Mexico, Canada, or any other third-party country, and Congress passed a law that restricted Japanese laborers trying to enter the United States from Hawaii. It was part of an immigration law that tightened entrance requirements. So, how did the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan go? It was later discovered that there was a very big loophole in this agreement. It had to do with marriages. Keep in mind that America was thought of as a place where riches could be made, and families with single daughters were encouraged to arrange marriages with Japanese men in the United States. The pictures they saw of prospective husbands convinced them that their daughters would be far better off in the United States than with anyone they could marry in Japan. Since arranged marriages were common in Japan, this practice was accepted by all parties. The ceremonies were performed in Japan without the groom present, but were legally binding. For the loophole in the Gentleman's Agreement, it allowed wives and children of laborers in the United States to join their husbands or fathers, but it did not restrict that privilege to marriages that predated the agreement. Any wife could immigrant, even one who got married after the agreement was enforced. They'll do these marriages by the thousands. These women would come pouring in, and if they have children in the United States, those children would be citizens. So, instead of cutting the population of Japanese people, this agreement would increase it. As it did, it wasn't all roses for women, though. Japanese men in the United States, most of whom were struggling to get by, were desperate for wives. They often sent pictures of themselves when they were younger and better looking, or pictures of someone else entirely. Tradition was strong in Japan, so to the fury of white supremacists, most of the brides remained in the United States. The women were honored to be a man's wife and the mother of his children, specifically American citizen children. As many as 10,000 picture brides would sail to the United States during the next decade. The measure to limit the Japanese population in the western United States had precisely the opposite effect. With anti-immigrant supporters believing Roosevelt should have sponsored an Exclusion Act, there was an effort to get the Republicans out of the White House and get a right-thinking Democrat in. Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of Princeton and Princeton University and an unapologetic racist, was going to run in 1912. He called the Ku Klux Klan a great organization that, quote, sprung into existence to protect the Southern country, unquote. Essentially, he was born and bred Southerner. He was a born and bred Southerner. However, he did not seem to like Asians when he wrote, quote, "The Chinese were more to be desired as workmen, if not as citizens, than most of the chorus crew that came crowding in every year at the eastern parts," unquote. Mayor Phelan would change Wilson's mind by sending him a telegram that included, quote, "I stand for the national policy of exclusion. The whole question is one of assimilation for diverse races. We cannot make a homogeneous population out of people who do not blend with the Caucasian races," unquote. Interestingly, Wilson released it as if he had written it himself. Still, Wilson was elected president in 1912, and Phelan was elected to the Senate in 1914. With those victories, Asian exclusion became policy in the White House. As we can see here, the Gentleman's Agreement was another attempt to limit Japanese immigration to prevent an international conflict with Japan and coordinate on limiting immigration from Japan. But as we saw the loophole in this informal policymaking process, Japanese immigration ended up increasing. This meant anti-Asian immigration sentiment was increasing. And as we will keep seeing, more efforts to decrease belonging for Asian immigrants would continue and become more formalized. In the next video, we will talk more about the efforts bad actors used to exclude demographic groups they considered inferior and undesirable. Until then, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on the post notifications so you will be notified when I post my next video. I appreciate your support. Remember, you are powerful, you are capable, and you are the changemaker our society needs. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you soon.